like to get to the article about that I've read, that I've written about the time that I actually sat down and had dinner with a Nazi, and this would have been in late summer of 2011. I had no idea exactly who I was sitting down with and having a conversation with, but I want to talk more about the intimate details of that while I connect these dots here so that we can have a better understanding of exactly why I make these kinds of claims and accusations. Now, my sincere, deep, troubled feels began years ago, back in 2008, when I was in the New York Libertarian movement. I was heading up Ron Paul's New York offices. It was the volunteer office that we had in New York City. And while I was there, the newsletters dropped. If you don't know what the Ron Paul newsletters are, you don't get to have an opinion on this subject. Okay, you can be. It's fine to have to be a libertarian and stuff like that, and be new and fresh and like that. But if you do not know what the newsletters are, and if you have not written them, I would just urge you to sit back and listen with an open mind and an open heart, because you cannot know the pain of the feeling of being a leader when you see half of your staff leave. All of my staff, almost all my staff, departed when the newsletters dropped before the Iowa caucuses in 2008. Now, a lot of us were very angry at the person who wrote the article about the newsletters. That would be Jamie Kirchick, who obviously had a bone to pick with libertarians. He was a neocon, and he saw us as weak against Russia. And of course, I had no clue that these newsletters existed at the time, but they were used both times against libertarians as to show that we were all white male racists, and that, of course, that they like to paint with a broad brush. But both times, in 2008 and 2012, the newsletters. Again, these were the newsletters. If you don't know what the newsletters, the Ron Paul newsletters are, again, I encourage you to do your own research on that. But I can tell you that those specific newsletters were exactly the reasons why Ron Paul lost the primaries, the Iowa primary, both times. It wasn't necessarily because of rigging. It was because of the bad press that came from the newsletters. And I became seriously concerned because as a leader, if you're a leader and you see half of your staff march out the door, you've either got to question yourself and your own tactics, or you've got to question your leader's tactics. Okay? That's a problem. It's one thing when you've got a couple of deserters on your hand. You know, during the Revolutionary War here in the United States, they had mutinies and deserters all the time. But you know why? It wasn't because the Revolutionary War soldiers, the American revolutionaries, were bad people. It was because their leadership was inept, because the Continental Congress failed to pay their dues, and they were the ones making the mistake. So when I saw that half of my staff left during that campaign, it was eye-opening to me, and I realized that the problem wasn't with me. The problem wasn't with the libertarian leaders who were fighting. It was a problem of those at the top. So if you haven't been paying attention to what's going on with the alt-right, then it would be understandable that you would say, oh, okay, well, you know, this is just hyperbole. Austin's just talking about something that, you know, he's just trying to paint all Trump supporters as fascists. Well, that's not true. There are a lot of good men and women who are Donald Trump supporters. These are not who I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the very sincere fascists, the type of people who are tweeting at me with photos of me in a concentration camp as well, and the type of abuse that I've been receiving is very reminding. It reminds me of the time that I had dinner with a Nazi. A young, attractive couple joined my group of dedicated liberty activists for cocktails and dinner one night in downtown New York City in the late summer of 2011. The man, we'll call him Sven, a handsome blonde of Germanic descent, and his similarly beautiful corn silk-haired girlfriend had been invited to join my friends and I in discussion and debate for the evening. We were all classical liberals, fighting for freedom from oppressive government, for civil rights, liberty, and free markets for all. But that's not what one young man at the party believed. As the presidential political season approached, and the re-election of Barack Obama signaled that there would be no hope for change in leadership, the modern American libertarian movement found itself in a difficult position. The campaign of Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul had inspired hordes of free market youth activists, including this author, me, to his banner. The movement was composed of people from all ages and backgrounds, and there was really only one thing that united all of them together: the belief in individual rights and personal liberty. This was the second effort for many of these young men and women who had cut their teeth on the 2008 version of the Texas congressman's campaign for the White House. Noted organizations such as the Campaign for Liberty, Young Americans for Liberty, and the now International Students for Liberty took root and have seen rapid growth across the nation. The total result of this movement has been to create a mini industry centered on the ideas of limited government and personal freedom. We have our heroes and villains, our clowns, and our workhorses. It's really quite remarkable. One self-proclaimed hero, that's up for debate in the community, is a man by the name of Alex Jones, whose conspiracy theory rants are broadcast into millions of homes on a daily basis. Remember, I wrote this in 2011, long before Jones turned into a Trump-tard. Jones is a radio broadcaster whose shows feature stories on how the U.S. government is building camps, presumably to intern Americans in the event of national disaster, and that the terrorist attacks of 9/11 were an orchestrated attack carried out by the elements of our own government. Jones was recently made known throughout the world on an appearance on CNN's Piers Morgan show, where his maniacal rants and ad hom painted the British host a perfect stereotype of the gun-toting lunatic American. Although Jones has taken steps to personally distance himself from the worst of anti-Semitism, it's an open secret that his online forums cultivate and harbor the worst kind of backward thinkers and rage-filled racists in the world of political discourse. Here's a perfect example of how this goes on. This is a little segue here. But the other day I got into a Twitter battle with Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute, and as soon as I started going back and forth with him, we're trying to talk about foreign policy, and all of a sudden I'm getting accused of being a Jew, and all of this, being accused of being a Zionist, and all of this weird anti-Jew stuff starts flying fast and furious at me. So if you think that these cockroaches aren't still under the rock, you're not lifting up the rocks. Does this make you mad? Does this make you angry when I talk about this stuff? Well, too effing bad. I've suffered long enough from these accusations of painting that the libertarian movement is a bunch of racist white people. Well, it's not. It's a very diverse movement. And there's even room for Jews in the movement. Anyways, let me continue here. During those Tea Party takeover years of 2007 to 2010, American libertarians rose up and either established or blatantly took over major institutions, including my own. I think that was when I was at FreedomWorks at the time, not sure. There has always been a small element of this conspiracy fringe that occupied a portion of the debates at events and online, suggesting that the president was not born in America or that he is secretly a Muslim. And do you remember who fed into that, ladies and gentlemen? Do you remember? That's right, Donald Trump. Many of these people are simply what you would consider garden variety conspiracy theorists and are relatively benign. However, there are some who are much more, and they are dangerous. This is how I met Sven. I broke the ice with Sven and his girlfriend, while another of our crowd ordered us drinks at the bar. It didn't take long for the conversation to switch to politics. The history of foreign policy came to the forefront. We talked about our belief in free markets, limited government, and a non-interventionist foreign policy. It was then that I learned something interesting about our new friend. Sven revealed that he believed the world would have been a better place if Hitler had won World War II. I blinked and laughed, assuming he must have been joking, but he just stared at me with those steely blue eyes and didn't laugh back. I leaned forward and asked in hushed tones, "Are you a Nazi?" He smiled and nodded. Sven confessed that his heart ached for what happened to Germany after the war. Quote, "We were a great people once until the communists took over. We were on our way to becoming the greatest empire the world had ever seen. And you, Austin, you are of Germanic descent. Your nation took the side of the Soviets against us, and look what it brought you." "But what about the Jews?" I asked. He shrugged. "Why do you care about the Jews? They were and still are a problem. They are the ones behind the Federal Reserve that you despise. The Jews attacked an American ship, the USS Liberty. Why would you defend them?" I couldn't hide my disgust, and the atmosphere at the party immediately grew cold. This was no ordinary kook that could just be written off as a simple lunatic. This was an articulate, supposedly intelligent, and well-spoken defender of the tenets of National Socialism. And say what you will, but at least it's an ethos. Just kidding. Sorry. I had to pull the Big Lebowski quote out there. My stomach may have turned, but my heart and my resolve hardened. I feel deeply, as a libertarian, that all people must be protected from tyranny and genocide. I secretly promised myself that I would do whatever it takes to make sure that people like Sven would never be associated with the message of liberty. Libertarianism is not a philosophy compatible with racial hatred. National Socialism is in no way compatible with liberty, and defenders of freedom must repudiate these philosophies to make a clear distinction between them. There is no room in the freedom revolution for those who advocate for racial hatred or eugenics. There will be no liberty for some if there is no liberty for all. When William Buckley attempted his famous purge of John Birchers from the conservative movement in the 1960s, he received a hellish backlash from many of his supporters and major donors. Although he knew that there would be no way for his movement to succeed in beating back the Social Democrats, with the conspiracy theorists tagging along, he took strong action anyway to stand against what he saw as a group dedicated to discrediting his cause. He ultimately succeeded, and the American conservative movement was able to regain its footing, scoring major victories in elections in the coming years. I want to connect the dots here, and I don't care if some of you don't think that some of you think the Washington Post is biased and you don't trust it. All newspapers have bias, but you have to take the facts and you have to go through and determine what is right and what is wrong. And in September 2nd, there was an article that was written in the Washington Post by a man by the name of Matthew Sheffield, who nobody could accuse of being a liberal Democrat, I would say. And he writes an article called "Where Did Donald Trump Get His Racialized Rhetoric?" Quote, from libertarians. Now listen to this. This is Trump's style and positions, endorsing and consorting with 9/11 truthers, promoting online racists, using fake statistics, draw on a now obscure political strategy called paleo-libertarianism, which was once quite popular among some Republicans, especially former presidential candidate Ron Paul. Formerly, Senator Rand Paul may be his father's political heir, but there's no question that the paranoid and semi-racialist mien frequently favored by Trump originates in the fevered swamps that the elder Paul dwelled in for decades. Most people who back Trump don't do so for racist reasons, but it's incredible how many of the same white nationalists and conspiracy theorists to whom Ron Paul once catered are now ardent Trump supporters. It's because Trump and Paul spoke the same language. Now listen to this. Mainstream libertarians have been agonizing over this legacy among themselves for some time, hoping that either the elder or younger Paul would definitively denounce the movement's racialist past, but no such speech has ever come. Instead, the paleo-libertarian strategy concocted decades ago as a way to push for minimal government threatens to replace right-wing libertarianism with white nationalism. The figure whose ideas unify Pauline libertarians and today's Trumpists is the late Murray Rothbard, an economist who co-founded the Cato Institute and is widely regarded as a creator of libertarianism. Nowadays, many libertarians like to portray their ideology as one that somehow transcends the left-right divide, but to Rothbard this was nonsense. Libertarianism, he argued, was nothing more than a restatement of the beliefs of the, quote, old right, which resolutely opposed the New Deal and any sort of foreign intervention in the early 20th century. Many of its adherents, such as essayist H.L. Mencken, espoused racist viewpoints. As moderate Republicans, such as Dwight Eisenhower, and the new right Christian conservatives, such as William F. Buckley, became more influential in the Republican Party in the 50s and 60s, the future creators of libertarianism gravitated instead toward the work of secular anti-communist thinkers, such as economist Ludwig von Mises and novelist Ayn Rand. There had always been some sympathy for racism and anti-Semitism among libertarianism. The movement's house magazine, Reason, dedicated an entire issue in 1976 to historical revisionism, including Holocaust revisionism. It also repeatedly ran articles in defense of South Africa's then segregationist government, though by 2016, the magazine was running articles like, quote, Donald Trump enables racism. But it was Rothbard's founding of the Ludwig von Mises Institute in 1982 that enabled the fledgling political movement to establish affinity with the neo-Confederate Lost Cause movement. Almost immediately after its creation, the Mises Institute began publishing critics of, quote, compulsory integration, attacks on Abraham Lincoln, and apologia for Confederate leaders. Institute scholars have also spoken to racist groups such as the League of the South. Rothbard even published a chapter in his book, The Ethics of Liberty, in which he stated that the purely free society will have a flourishing free market in children, although he didn't specify the races of the children who might be sold. These, and many other controversial views advocated by Mises writers, make sense from a fanatical libertarian viewpoint, but they also originate in a political calculation Rothbard revealed in a 1992 essay, lamenting the defeat of a Republican white nationalist and former KKK leader David Duke in the 1991 Louisiana governor's race by a bipartisan coalition. Expanding on themes raised 2 years earlier by his longtime partner, Lewin Rockwell, an editor and fundraiser for libertarian causes, Rothbard argued that Duke's candidacy was vitally important because it made clear that, quote, old America had been overthrown by an updated 20th century coalition of throne and altar. and its state church of government officials, journalists, and social scientists. Well, he might have a point there. But besides commending Duke as an exemplar of this kind of candidate he was looking to support, Rothbard also invoked the, quote, exciting former Senator Joe McCarthy of Wisconsin, not because of his economic views, but because he was a brash populist, prone to doing erratic things. Does that sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? Rothbard, in my opinion, would have probably loved Donald Trump. And that's why you see so many anarcho-capitalists or self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalists and libertarians getting on the Donald Trump train. This is my own editorializing, by the way. Rothbard's description of McCarthy seems eerily similar to the campaign that Trump has been running. The fascinating, the exciting thing about Joe McCarthy was precisely his means, his right-wing populism. This is Rothbard. His willingness and ability to reach out to short-circuit the power elite, liberals, centrists, the media, the intellectuals, the Pentagon, Rockefeller Republicans, and reach out and whip up the masses directly. With Joe McCarthy, there was a sense of dynamism, of fearlessness, and of open-endedness, as if whom would he subpoena next? But what I can tell you right now is that after having been in the libertarian movement for a decade, I have seen this type of racialized rhetoric, and I have seen it up close. But what I stated yesterday on my Facebook page, and some of the statement that I really want to stick by here, is the weird brand of ethno-nationalist mumbo-jumbo from Trump did in part come from the libertarian movement. But you know what? That's why we true libertarians are so glad that Trump is the nominee. Why? Because now all the Nazis, the crazies, and the other turds have left our movement. I mean, congratulations, Republicans. Thanks for helping the libertarians clean house. You know, at the very least, Trump has exposed Alex Jones as the fascist child that I have been telling people that he was for years. He's a mountebank and a fraud and a snake oil salesman. And isn't it amazing, too, that the people who have been terrorizing us for the last decade about government putting us all in FEMA camps, remember that? They've now embraced the ideology of people who actually put people in camps.